Welcome to Power Up, the podcast that uncovers the unique challenges women leaders face today. Join your hosts, Nat and Kristen, as we dive into the tough topics and provide actionable insights you can apply right now. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes.
We have been thinking a lot, and I think this is probably coming through in a lot of the stuff we've been talking about in our mini masterclasses, newsletters, podcasts, about busyness, but also kind of really focusing on the gendered differences in how we operate. And what we've sort of uncovered in the last couple of weeks is just a couple of unhelpful stories that we all tend to tell ourselves that aren't necessarily, they don't feel personal. It's not like I'm too old or I'm not smart enough. They're more almost stories we tell ourselves about our roles as women in the world. And so we just thought this would be an interesting opportunity. We don't have the answers necessarily. We just have some observations and some questions and some thoughts that we've developed over the last couple of weeks. So we just thought we would have take this as an opportunity to record a podcast while kind of trying to get to the bottom of some of these unhelpful stories.
We just had an interview in Power Suit with Vinka Wong. She's fabulous. She is a perimenopause, menopause hormone expert. Does all sorts of fabulous things to help women. Calls herself a what does she call herself? A medical detective. But anyway, the reason why I thought I would introduce this right up top is because we've been thinking about. She talks about that 40 to 55 year gap where women end up divorcing their husbands, they drop out of the workforce, there's lots of mental health issues, like um there's a real time in life that we go through. And what I thought was interesting and why I thought I'd lead with this, because it's almost like we carry on with our lives in this busyness and doing everything and superwoman and other people owning my time. And then perimenopause is like the ultimate unmasker. And menopause, it is like unmasks how unsustainable our pace was all along. And so all of a sudden, we're in this ironic moment where we've internalized our value and our busyness and our worth to others and what that means, our productivity. And then our bodies literally can't produce at this level anymore. So we were going to chat about perimenopause later, but I'm like, is there's no greater sign than our bodies medically going no, then what is there?
Yeah, and I agree. And this is a really enlightening conversation. And one of the things I dropped very early on in the interview was I've been feeling tired. I've probably spoken a bit about that patch earlier on this year where I just really struggled to get off the couch. And I sort of put it down to, oh, well, we've started a new business. There's a lot happening. And she immediately came back to me with, "Well, you've always been this busy. Why did it suddenly impact you differently?" And I felt like that was such an interesting and she continued on throughout the interview to point out how women have a tendency to undervalue our time, which is something that we have covered recently quite a bit, but also we don't allow ourselves to never be busy. So we create this busyness cycle of as soon as one thing drops, we pick up another thing. And I've noticed it a lot with even talking to a lot of professionals at a similar level in their career. And there is a marked gender difference. Like if you talk to an executive or even any man in a leadership position, a formal leadership position, they're leaning back. They seem to have all the time in the world. They come across as completely in control. They utilize delegation effectively as a tool, maybe sometimes too effectively. They ponder things. They're considerate of the answers. And when we have conversations with women in exactly the same boat, it feels that they're frazzled. They're running around like headless chickens. They feel overwhelmed and stressed. And I think this is not a genetic thing. This is not something that is we're innately more overwhelmed or unable to manage our time. When you look at socialization and all the different cues we get throughout our lives, it drives this very, very significant way of almost thinking about ourselves and the world, which then, of course, drives behavior quite differently. Do you notice that too?
Well, when you were what I tell you what I did notice, I noticed all of it, yes, but when you were chatting, I was thinking about these reels that I've seen that are talking about and it's giving advice to younger people, particularly men, so it's often men, and who knows how I end up in these algorithms, but anyway, I do. Who knows? I do, I watch something and so I get
Look,
them all.
I've got Joe Jonas at the moment. I don't know why Joe Jonas appeared on my feed, but he is now a massive part of it.
I think it's because and I'm gonna bring him into the conversation. I think it's because Pivot is my favorite podcast, and that has got Scott Galloway and, Kara, God, perimenopause brain, but anyway, Kara, I'm gonna bring it up later. Anyway, it's fabulous. It's all about the economy and tech and politics and whatever. They're great. But he is quite controversial because he gives a lot of advice to men and it is, controversial, it's polarizing advice, so I don't listen to his men stuff because 'cause I'm not interested. But what I find are reels and guys like him are going, "Double down in your 20s, work your ass off in your 20s because it will pay off so that you can ease off." Exactly what you said. In your later 30s, your 40s, your 50s, you can ease off because you front loaded that work and you've gone like mad and then and true to your point, I'm like, what woman is ever like, "Work really hard in your 20s because in your 30s, 40s, and 50s, it will get so much easier."
Well,
So
and
I just
also just that concept
yeah.
of working really hard in your 20s, and that tends to play out in a gendered way as well, of working really hard in your 20s and 30s for men tends to be your sole focus should be your career. You don't have to turn up at the school events. You're optional as as a society, not necessarily individual decisions, but as a society, men are optional. You see it even in the way childcare is arranged it's sort of a woman's arena still. There's like, men are optional, but they are meant to provide to focus on themselves, whereas women have not had that same expectation to the point that even now I've had a conversation recently with someone who's moved. Kids are later teens. She's moved to a different city. And I was really fascinated by how instantly the conversation moved to, "Oh, are you comfortable leaving your kids? How do you" and I was like, "I don't think this would have happened." This would not have been the first line of questioning when she's talking about all sorts of very interesting things happening in her life, and the expectation that we're meant to be juggling a lot of things and spreading our mind and energy and time across all sorts of things. It's just not an expectation that men have, and therefore you see it playing out, across multiple different things.
Yeah, and the expectation of being capable of everything, being the caregiver, being the nurturer, but equally now introduce careers in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and up till now. And all of a sudden, like nothing has come off our plates. If anything, more has come on technology, cognitive load, and we're still project managing most aspects of our lives. And so there's this real super women mindset that we have been told we have to manage it all, therefore we do, and therefore we wear exhaustion and sometimes bitterness like a badge of honor. And your concept of busyness, which we talk about quite a bit, but nothing is ever good enough. And to kind of my point of menopause, that our perceived value is one of productivity. Therefore, if I don't have a million outputs and spinning a million plates, then what value, what worth am I? Therefore, just drop out.
I have a couple of things on this. One is I think it is like even talking about perimenopause, I mentioned, and I think a lot of us maybe not all of us, but a lot of us identify with asking their mums around menopause and what their experience is, and them sort of really minimizing it, saying, "Oh, it wasn't really a thing for me." And even in this interview we just did, she's like, "Oh, it wasn't my experience of your menopause." It was outrageous. So we have been role modeled our entire lives this idea of we have to pretend these things aren't hard. I was talking to someone the other day about childbirth, and their thing was to try and minimize the amount of interventions they had. And I was thinking, isn't that funny how in any other operation or medical procedure, it would be about pain relief and looking after yourself. But when it comes to birth, we're still expected to maximize the amount of pain we're under. And I just feel like these are stories. These are, and that kind of leads back to this. These are the stories we tell ourselves. And I think that wearing exhaustion and bitterness like a badge of honor, this is one of the damaging stories. And I feel like we should start here because we talk to a lot of women and men. And there is a particular conversation that I've had a few times recently where the person turns up, they are clearly tired, they are clearly overwhelmed, They talk a lot about being busy. They talk a lot often about doing several jobs, and we've talked about this before, people who say, "I'm doing 2 people's jobs or 4 people's jobs," and I'm like, running the maths on that being like, you literally aren't working 120 to 180 hours a week. You're just not. So, you're actually not doing those jobs. You have just talked yourself into believing that you are really hard done by doing all of these jobs when you may be doing 40, 50 hours. And yes, there's a lot of context switching. And yes, 3 jobs may have been merged into 1 job because of redundancies, all that sort of stuff. But that to me, the way these conversations start and proceed has an undercurrent of bitterness and feeling hard done by and taking on everyone else's load in a way that you often hear. It serves on psychologically us at some level to appear like that. The challenges, or to convey that, the challenges, the way it comes across is actually quite career limiting, because when you're on the other side of that, you're listening to someone lie effectively, exaggerate massively the amount of work they're doing without realizing it, because if you're not doing 120 hours work, you're not doing 3 jobs. And we all know people who are in less privileged positions who are actually working 3 separate jobs. And it is a lot different to having 3 roles merged into one. But you do come across as someone who is sort of resistant or negative and unable to manage your time in a way that I think you don't realize, because you're trying to convey how much you take on and how much you're capable of, but how it's received is often quite different. Does that I know I've kind of just gone
No, no,
roundabout, but
it all makes sense, and I can relate, having had those chats, and we see it with power suit when women don't put themselves first, be it their health, their professional development, investing in future you, effectively. It can be really problematic in terms of burning the candles at both ends, and burnout is what I hear when you, talk about that, because there's only so long that we can sustain that level of, intensity and context switching and, blah. But, what I am curious about is the double-edged sword for women, and maybe we can chat about that. So first of all, there's this weakness in asking for help, and if I were in a workplace and a man asked for help and a woman asked for help, there would be different judgments placed to help. There would be different judgments placed on that. So there's a sense of our personal brands, and our personal brands are diminish more probably for women when we are in a position where we maybe set a boundary, possibly, gonna question mark that and ask your opinion. Certainly when we ask for help because, a label of, "Can't handle it, can't," "We've gotta give this work," "She's under a lot of pressure at the moment," these kinds of things. And then what was the other thing I was thinking? Yeah, that the alignment of kind of weakness and asking for help. Um, and then finally the scarcity thing. Like you have fought tooth and nail to get where you are. It's often with more men than women. And who like you're the first person that can't do it because of everything else you're doing out and around it. Thoughts on that? Because there is this real double-edged sword.
yeah, I was just thinking about how I've tackled that recently, and we actually had a conversation this morning where I was complaining about something. And one of the things that I want to practice more, and did in this context, but through frustration, is rather than saying, "Can I take it on?" or "I should take it on," or "I'm able to take it on," ask, "Why should I take it on?" And I think that has been something that I have often found myself getting grumpy about, that I'm like, I feel someone's expected me to take something on that I feel like is an unfair load, and I grumble, 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 ring you, complain a bit. And what I learnt this morning afterwards is the question I really should be asking myself, without judgment or frustration to the other person, because they don't know. They're not pushing this on me. They've just asked. And I don't have to turn it into this massive story about expectations and pressure. Is to just go, do I want to take this on? And should I take it on? And if I ask myself those 2 questions instead of can I, or, I feel like I need to, I come up with a very different result, and I can very comfortably go, "Nah, it's not actually," like we often say, "I'm not on that committee." I'm quite happy being like, "Nah, thanks, no, not for me." And I think maybe that's something we could all practice a bit more, rather than seeing it as a test of what we can take on, take back control and say, "Should I? Do I want to?"
I like that because it moves it from being out of control of my own time and my own calendar to being back in control of my time. I own my time, and I, very what did you say? It wasn't diplomatically, but it was without emotion going, "Oh, no, I'm gonna own my time here, therefore I'm not gonna do that thing."
Yeah, because I think we sometimes we get really angry with other people and we put it on them, and they're actually not the problem, it's us who feel the pressure. It's not necessarily them putting the pressure on us, it's just that we've been so socialized to think that pressure is there.
And what about let's talk about a woman who has busted through into the senior ranks of an organization and possibly surrounded by 6 dudes who maybe don't have the external, pressures and responsibilities that this woman has. How might one navigate that environment?
So this is another story that I feel like I don't know if this is what you're alluding to, but something else we've discussed recently. Sometimes we will say things like they're facts, but we haven't actually got any evidence. So it could be if I don't take this on, it's not going to end well for me. If I don't take this on, I'm not going to be seen as a team player. And often that is phrased not as like a I'm worried about it. It is phrased as a in this environment, and you can see it in very high performing environments like consultancies, big corporates. If I don't say yes to this, I will be impacted. And the question we've started asking is, can you explain a situation where it did impact you? And most of the time, they don't have one because they've never actually tested that theory. They've just created this story in their heads that they must say yes to everything, otherwise, they'll be negatively impacted. And I don't think the men they're surrounded by have that same story. So they have been merely testing this and just saying no to stuff all along and not seeing. And there are some biases there, obviously, like you say, we do have a double-edged sword, but I do think we should challenge ourselves if we have a story about inability to say no, inability to turn things down or delegate or reduce things from our load, to really test ourselves to go, what evidence do I have that this is true? And how much of this is a story that I may have picked up from some subtle signals or cues or life experiences that has made me to believe this is fact where it may not be?
Mm, yeah. Yeah, I like it. I remember so many instances, I think I've talked about it before, where projects would come down from very senior men. I only seem to ever report into men, and these, like, projects would come down, and they just totally whiffed of, like, make work projects, like, it was just some random thought bubble that came up for the guy in a meeting, and, "Oh, I know, we'll get Kristen on that," and I got really good in my early career just not doing the work because I was like, "I can guarantee you" I could smell it, and I was like, "I know this is never gonna come to anything. I know I'm probably not even gonna be asked for this analysis or this report or this thing in 1 week's time," and so I always pushed it to your point. I was actually like, "I'm gonna do an experiment. I'm just simply not gonna do this thing." And this is my personal brand. I'm testing and experimenting. Invariably, never heard another peep about it ever. So I learned really early to test those things and be like, "I don't know if this has to be done." And we talk a lot about strategic yeses as well now, like methodically going through what's a strategic yes, what moves the needle, da da da. But I just remember doing that and testing it a little bit more.
I think I have, developed another tactic that I think my girlfriend Kyla has picked up on or has developed herself, and we always ask, "What's the problem this is solving?" Because as soon as you ask that, 9 times out of 10 with busy work, actually 10 times out of 10 with busy work, there is no problem, they can't articulate it. You do risk I mean, both situations, there is a risk. You risk looking like you've dropped the ball, I risk looking like I'm difficult and constantly challenging things, but there are professional and diplomatic ways of doing both things, that actually can lead you to be perceived as more helpful and more of a strategic thinker than racing off and just following instructions. And again, that's something we've experienced too, that you sort of have a brain fart, you say something out loud. We're used to operating in small teams and being able to say things and just kind of get them out. And you suddenly notice people jumping up to action and you're like, I didn't ask you to act on that. Like, why did you? So I feel like that again is like you can run these experiments and just see what happens. And if you're someone who always over delivers and you drop the ball once, I guarantee it's not going to ruin your career. So especially if it's something that you're pretty confident isn't moving the needle.
I kind of liked how you started with stories rather than we're talking a lot about like obviously right now we're talking about strategic yeses and prioritization and calendars and time management and taking back, da da da. But I love how actually you started with mindset and the stories we tell ourselves because if I just think of an example of like a story I'd tell myself of me saying no in that scenario. I'm at the table, bunch of people who typically would say yes, and there's a lot of social pressure to say yes and to take that on. And so, we're like, "Oh my god, it gotten taken me all these years and all this hard work to get here. What if I mess up? I'm gonna say yes, da da da." What if the story we're telling ourselves is like, what if saying no is being a team player because I just happen to then over deliver on the important work that I've been tasked to do. Like, what if? It is the mindset shift, isn't it?
Yeah, it goes back to those fundamentals, and I think that's why this topic, granted we're not gonna cover it all today, but is so interesting that when we talked about those 2 groups of, like, you could ring most men at a senior level and they're relaxed and they've got time for thinking, and then women are almost the exact opposite. And most of the time, hashtag not all men, hashtag not all women, but, there is a mindset shift and it's underlying everything, and granted our mindsets are very much shaped by our experiences and biases and social norms, but they do lead us to create stories, and we do have to, if we want to make our own lives easier, address those stories. The other one that's been really playing on my mind recently is, so in New Zealand, we have summer holidays at Christmas time. So there's like a big, most of the country sort of disappears for a month or two. And there was a article on, well, it was kind of across the news the other day about how should we close down the country for so long? We are a small economy. It's been struggling. One of the best things potentially we could do for our economy is to like work more over this patch. The amount of vitriol and anger every time I've raised this, because I'm always curious what people think. People are so angry at that idea because they are, in quotation marks, almost verbatim from everyone I've spoken to, crawling towards the finish line. I do not feel that this year. There are some years I feel that, there are some years I don't. I feel like I am betraying people by saying I am not crawling towards the finish line, because we're all meant to feel so miserable and tired and down by the end of the year that it feels like bad to say, no, I'm pretty good and working at a sustainable level. Life is fine. And that's not to undermine people who are crawling to the finish line. It's just that I notice that every year everyone says it, not everyone, but a lot of people say it every year. So there's never a year they're not crawling to the finish line. And I've done a fair few half marathons, and whatever distance I run, if I'm running 21 Ks, I guarantee at 19 Ks, I'm going to feel exhausted. I won't feel at all tired at 5. If I'm running 5 Ks, I'm gonna feel exhausted at 3 Ks. It's same as walking the Queen Charlotte track. When you know there's an hour left to go, that last hour feels long and hard. And I feel like, again, this is another story we tell ourselves, that when you have a deadline or when you have a end in sight, of course you're gonna feel tired. It's how our brains work. But we've now created this national story of, and particularly women who've had to take on a lot of the balance and the juggle. It's become like this, really, this is the end, rather than retelling a story, which is what I've been telling myself for the last couple of years, is I'm just doing a 2-week holiday and then life continues. There's no hard finish and hard start. It's just another gap where I get to have a bit of downtime.
I love that, Nat. You just strike me as like the defiant 2-year-old, the 2-year-old that is what is the contrarian? You're like the contrarian that's never had to adopt, everyone else's. You're just like, "Good morning. It isn't morning, it's evening." Yeah,
I am.
so anyway,
And this is, like I say, it's not, I know some individuals are crawling quite rightly. There are some big hard years that have been had. It's just that I've noticed that there are some people who every year they're crawling, and I'm like, "Well, shouldn't we kind of resolve why?"
no,
Like,
no, I know, I think it's great. I think it's great, and I that's my invitation, and I'm gonna end on this, is that the invitation is what if we could 2 things actually. The first is be contrarian. Don't be, that don't be that frazzled person. Flip the mindset. And actually we did have a session about a year ago, is what if when people asked us how we were doing, we responded with positive adjectives. So be the contrarian, number 1. Second one is just like, and we've done a podcast before. Oh, I don't remember the episode. It was way back when, on self-limiting beliefs. The same the same rules apply to get ourselves out of the stories we tell ourselves and the beliefs we tell ourselves. Number 1, awareness. Just be aware how you are thinking about things in the coming weeks, how you respond to people, the invisible yeses you're making yourself do. So that's it. Just the first one is be the contrarian, and the second one is just be aware of the stories that you're telling yourself, and then move to
yeah,
test
and
them. But
not
let's
because
start
it's
with
annoying to anyone else, because I don't care. I honestly, like, if you are definitely crawling towards the end of the year. Absolutely. That, like, this is not about other people. This is about when we suddenly realize, and sometimes what we see, that those stories are actually not serving you. Like, they are hurting you more than they're helping you. And it may feel comfortable to stick with them, and it may feel like it's a story that has served you well in the past. But if it's no longer serving you now, try and challenge it and build that evidence, because it could actually make your life a little bit nicer. Like the perimenopause talk. And she's like, you're going to complain about being busy forever, because I guarantee the moment you take something off your plate, you're going to add two more things. This is a mindset for you. You have to actually learn how to not do that. And I was like, fair. So true.
Boom.
Got to stop.
Yeah. Love it. On that, thank you, everyone. Check out powersuit.com, and we will catch you next time.
Bye.